Hi there, family and friends. Pastor Carl Nero, Assistant Pastor at New Morning Star Missionary Baptist Church on the west side of Chicago. Here with my lovely wife, Sister Melanie Nero.
Thank you all so much for tuning in. In case you missed our live broadcast, we're going to do a replay right after this message. We met with Dr. Terrilyne Cole. She is an infectious disease physician. And the topic for the night was separating fact from fiction, the COVID-19 vaccine. Is it safe for me?
We want you to be able to make an informed decision on whether or not you should take the vaccine. I believe Dr. Cole made a compelling case on just why you should. So we want you to have knowledge and be blessed by this broadcast. Feel free to like it, forward it to your family and friends, those in your network, so we all can do what's best for our families. Be blessed.
God bless you. So I have the distinct pleasure of introducing everybody to someone who I look up to, someone who I admire. I have the distinguished honor of calling her soror. She happens to be a member of our sorority, Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. And she is a distinguished person. I'm so happy that she's here with us tonight. Let me tell you a little bit more about her. Dr. Terrilyne Cole is an experienced physician with an expertise in cannabis medicine, infectious diseases, epidemiology, prevention, global health, and healthcare management. Throughout her career, she has held positions in a myriad of sectors, including public and private medical research, clinical trials, rehabilitative services, and she currently works as a medical consultant and practicing physician with a focus on medical cannabis and infectious disease. Dr. Cole possesses a penchant and passion for educating people about diseases and doing so in a manner that is digestible and relatable to laypersons and medical professionals alike. She earned her MD from the University of Illinois, the College of Medicine at Urbana-Champaign, and completed an internal medicine internship and residency at the University of Alabama at Birmingham. Subsequently, Dr. Cole completed a postdoctoral fellowship in infectious disease at University Washington School of Medicine, one of the largest infectious disease programs in the country. Dr. Cole currently lives in the metro east of St. Louis. Dr. Cole, we are so happy to have you here with us tonight. We're honored. We appreciate you taking your time. I have to let you all know that she has really been working the circuit. I mean, she has been working overtime to make sure that people are informed and that they've got the information that they need to be able to make a decision for them. So we know that the word says that people perish for a lack of knowledge. So we don't want that to be us tonight. So thank you again for being here with us today. We thought a good way to start is to really just kind of wind you up and let you go. I mean, I know you and I talked and there's so many different things that you want to share. So we'll kind of break it into three different parts. We'll start with really the virus and have her really just give us level set for us, so set the foundation, teach us some about that. We will get into some talk about the vaccine. And then the third part is the voices. So feel free, those that are on the phone, on the Zoom with us, to feel free to go ahead and shoot us a message in the chat. You can do it to everyone or to us individually, and we'll field those questions and make sure that we bring those to Dr. Cole's attention so we can discuss those. So.
Okay. I think it's really important because the media and then social media and cable television and radio has a lot of discussion about where we are with the pandemic. And we're 15 months into this now, and there's still issues with testing, and people are concerned about whether or not they should get a vaccine. There's some hesitancy because of past historical wrongs. There's supply issues with the vaccine. There's still supply issues with personal protective wear. And now I'm sure everybody is hearing a lot about these viral variants that are out. And so I thought to kind of just discuss all of that you should really have some basic background information. And so you'll have a better understanding of all of the complexities that I think as a country that we're struggling with, and also other countries as well. So the first thing is, what's a pandemic? A pandemic is when a disease like COVID-19 is found in many countries at the same time in the world. If we can go back to November of 2019, in Wuhan, China, which is 11 million people. China in total is 1.5 billion people. They started seeing these atypical pneumonias. And when I mean atypical, they weren't responding to the normal therapies and the medications that we give people when they have serious pneumonias. And so when they found what the organism was, it was a new coronavirus. Now, are coronaviruses new? No, they're not. We've studied the class of coronaviruses probably since the late 60s. And I think the most recent common ancestor to, is existed 10,000 years ago. So they have been around for quite some time. Now, when we talk about coronaviruses, they can affect animals. So camels, bats, pigs, cows. There are even coronavirus vaccines for cows that I think a lot of people thought that we could go ahead and use, which we cannot. And so out of all of these, then there are some that just infect us. So there's 7. 4 of those circulate all the time. They cause the common cold, they cause bronchitis, they cause atypical pneumonias. And then there are these 3 that have made the transition from animals to us. The first one you may remember hearing about was SARS, and they call it SARS. The acronym is SARS-CoV-1. And that was around 2002, 2003. We don't deal with SARS anymore because it essentially died out, and it had a much higher mortality rate than what we're dealing with now. Another one was called MERS, and I think only a couple people in the United States ended up getting that, but it's the Middle East respiratory syndrome, and it came from camels. Similar kind of presentation with respiratory symptoms and thing, and it really had a mortality rate, and it still kind of smolders in that area, but you don't really hear much about it. And then now this SARS-CoV-2, and I refer to it that way because that is the virus, but you all are probably hearing about it as just COVID-19, okay? So the first case that was documented in the United States was January 21st of 2000, and it was in the Pacific Northwest. And you may have remember hearing about this nursing home in the suburbs of Seattle, and how a lot of patients and residents that were living there were passing away, as well as the people that were working there. It was a high mortality rate. And it was identified then. And we realized that we were going to have a problem. Honestly, I think because of the last administration, who, from what I understand, were told in December that this was going to be a problem that was coming from China, that it was spreading now on into the European countries. You probably remember, hearing about a lot of deaths in Italy and in Spain. So they knew about it, but we didn't really talk about it. And then we had this issue where we had all of those people pass away in this nursing home. So about a week later, China released the genetic code for this virus to the WHO, and then the WHO gave it out to the rest of the world. Within a week later, we started working on vaccines, okay? So there was a really quick kind of progression of you hear this information and then it was passed on. So why am I telling you all this? I'm telling you all this because I want you to understand how important understanding the genetics of this are, and why we are having such the difficulty with these viral variants, and why we are worried about them, even though we have vaccines, okay? So if you think about every living organism, right, has genetic material, and think of it like it's an instruction manual, and it contains all the information that you need. And so there's these RNA, and that's the genetic material that this virus uses, and it has all the information to make it and then also maintain it. And so its genetic sequences has this special code, and they're like, 5 letters that represent these different nucleotides. And don't get caught up in the scientific, I'm explaining this and you'll get what I mean in a minute. And so like all viruses, they constantly are mutating and are altering themselves, okay? And it's these nucleotide bases Just, I'm going to call them A, C, G, T, and U. Okay. And why does this happen? Well, you have these changes in these nucleotide bases, and it happens as the virus is trying to divide and make copies of itself. And then sometimes these mutations are benign and they go unnoticed, and we don't have any problems with them. And then sometimes they cause great concern, like what we're seeing now. There are 4 variants that you might be hearing about on the news a lot. And each variant is named for the country that they were first detected. But, having mutations isn't enough in itself to make a new variant, meaning a new strain of this SARS-CoV-2. You need to also have certain amino acids, okay? And think of this proteins. Think of them almost like Legos, and they are like the building blocks, and we use them in our body, to make all kinds of different proteins. And if these different building blocks change the way that this virus behaves, then it becomes a variant. For example, when we are concerned with vaccines, they're talking more and more about, will these variants not respond to vaccines, okay? And so there's been more talk about how these viral strains, these new variants will escape or they'll evade the vaccine and then spread the virus more effectively. And vaccines need a host. The host that they need is us. And that's what the host is in this pandemic. And so in order to stay alive, they are constantly looking for ways to make themselves more transmissible and more able to get to more people. People often ask, well, why is it though that China always seems to be the country that has SARS, the first SARS, and this SARS, and H1N1, and bird flu, and a number of different things. And it's because, and the reason why I mentioned the population, it's because the more densely populated an area is, if we're talking about these respiratory viruses that are infectious, then if you cough, if you sneeze, if you just breathing normally in and out of your nose and your mouth, you are able to transmit this virus to other people. And so if there's not room to spread out, then it will make its way to more people. You probably see that when you are noticing that there are entire families in one household that will get it. It's the same kind of concept. If you can't spread and you can't isolate from it, then you have a high likelihood of contracting it. So what are we thinking we're going to have to do with these variants? Are we going to, it kind of raises these questions that I think about, do we need to change our behavior? So do we need to have more restrictions? Do they need to be more curfews? What about closing? Should we be wearing 2 masks now? Do we need to social distance even further than 6 feet within schools, within church, with that at work? Do we need to have work from home? Do we need to decrease the number of hours that stores are open? And then the other thing is, do you open the schools? Do you close the schools? Do you kind of do a hybrid? What do you do? And then the larger question is, will these vaccines for this now work? Okay. And I'm going to come back to this idea of these variants because I know they're constantly on the news within this last week or so. In order to be able to understand, I think, how vaccines are developed, I just want to run down real quick how that works in the United States. And so you'll have an understand about why there's a supply and demand issue, okay? When you think about vaccine clinical trials, you got to start with an idea. And whatever that idea is, you develop a model for it. And you work in the lab setting to see, does it do what you want it to do? And do you think it's going to be safe? And if you do, you make this animal model and you transmit to smaller animals. So we're talking about mice. So when we take this idea of this vaccine and we put it in mice, are we not killing them? We're not maiming them? And does it look like it's doing what we want it to do? And if it's yes, then we move that concept on to larger animals. Oftentimes they're like rhesus macaques, a type of monkey. And again, we're looking to make sure it's safe. So it's not going to kill them or maim them or disable them. And is it doing what we want it to do? vaccines, if you can think of it like this, there are two main things that we are concerned about. One, vaccines, we want them to prevent you from dying. That's the big one. So the second thing is we want also for you to have less severe disease, say if you were to catch the virus, okay? So if you think about the flu vaccine every single year, it doesn't have the greatest effectiveness. Sometimes it's only like 35%, 50% is kind of in that same range. And it covers a whole bunch of different strains, different variants every year. Well, we still give it because we know this vaccine will prevent death in some people, and then will also prevent serious disease so they are not hospitalized. Okay, so now we're at these large animals that have done well and it's safe. So now we're at the point where we want to start having human clinical trials. And you'll hear phase 1, I'm sure you've heard phase 2, and you've definitely heard phase 3 in the news because they're constantly talking about the press releases from Pfizer and Moderna and Johnson & Johnson, and the releases they're talking about when they give those percentages, it's the information in this phase 3 trial. Okay, so a phase 1 trial is small. So we're talking about tens to hundreds of people, but everybody is healthy. Nobody has medical problems. Nobody's taking any medication. And the big deal is the vaccine that we're given or the medication, is it safe? And if it's safe in people, then we also start looking to see, is it going to do what we want it to do? Is it going to help folks not have serious disease? It looks like that. Or oftentimes at this point, we're really just looking to see, is your immune system going to respond to it? And how we kind of determine that is whether or not the body starts generating antibodies or other protective cells like T cells. And if it does those things, and then it moves on to phase 2. Now, phase 2 is 1,000 or 10,000s of people in it. It's still healthy people, but now it's more folks in there that probably, maybe they have diabetes that's controlled or controlled blood pressure, but they have chronic illnesses that they take medications for. And now we're still looking to see that it's safe and that it's doing what we want it to do. It's making people's immune systems responsive. If those two things are answered, then it goes to phase 3. And phase 3 is huge. So we're talking about tens of thousands, sometimes hundreds of thousands, and there'll be different arms. And what I mean by that is you'll hear information that says, yes, this clinical trial was done in the United States, this was done in the UK, this one is done in Brazil. And it's because at phase 3, you want your study, whatever it is, your intervention, this vaccine, to be able to be representative in as many people as you can, okay? And you are now going to have everybody in here. Healthy people, folks who have controlled disease, chronic diseases, folks who have uncontrolled, people who are sick with other things. You're going to have a variation of adult ages. And let me just make a comment. With these vaccines being so new, we did not study them in children first. We don't tend to do trials with children until we know they're pretty safe in adults. So right now, I think Pfizer, maybe somebody else started adolescent trials, because the two vaccines that we are using in the United States are for 18 years and older, and we don't have the clinical data on those that are younger than that.
Okay. A quick question, Dr. Cole, about just the demographics.
Yeah.
So when we talk about, you said they're going to start, or they're going through initial steps for the clinical trials for children. When do you think they'll get to the point where they'll be vaccinating children?
That's a good question. And I don't know if that, I think conversations for that are starting, right? Okay. But I don't think you're going to be able to get those kind of answers till you start seeing how children respond. And the way they do it, they kind of do it, they're called de-escalation. And what it means is the dosage that we used for adults, we see whether or not we have to lower it in kids. I mean, that's the kind of easiest way to think about it. But I think we'll probably have more information about that in probably about 3 or 4 more months. Maybe by the summertime, we might know. The thing with clinical trials in children is that we don't put them in there at first because we just don't know how it's going to respond in adults, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's always hesitancy from people, adults, to get it. So we definitely don't start off with children, even though we want those answers, right? Same kind of deal with when you're pregnant. We don't enroll pregnant people, but people get pregnant while they're in the trials, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there were pregnant people in almost all of these trials. They got pregnant during the time. None of them had problems.
Mm-hmm.
Okay?
Is there any specific segment of the population that should not get vaccinated? Is there any group of people that should not for any particular reason?
I think the AstraZeneca Oxford had some problems with allergic reactions with people who had autoimmune diseases. So like lupus or rheumatoid arthritis or dermatomyositis, things like that. And they were cautioned to say, if you were going to take this vaccine, you need to have this conversation with your primary care provider. But there have been plenty of folks that I know who've had lupus, who've gone on and gotten vaccinated and not had a problem. Anytime you're starting something new, you always have to give that caveat of, this is the experience that we have and the data we have from the clinical trials, but these things might happen because you have an autoimmune thing. And with the vaccines, we're trying to stimulate your immune system. And people who have autoimmune disease already have heightened autoimmune responses anyway. So it's kind of like this, but there's not really any one group that we are saying can't have it unless they are allergic to vaccine components. Now, there are the two vaccines that we are using in the United States are Pfizer and Moderna, and they are mRNA vaccines. So remember how I talked about the genetic information? Okay, so the genetic information is this messenger RNA. And in these two vaccines, there are 4 sugars, salt water, and this fat layer that protects the messenger RNA, and that's it. And there are no preservatives in it. Okay, and a lot of times it's the preservatives in vaccines that people end up having a really bad reaction to. And sometimes it can be polyethylene glycol, and it's called PEG. We give it to people to drink to clean out their colon for a colonoscopy. So the amount we give people to clean out their colon is nothing that's, it's not even remotely close to what's in the vaccine. So when we say that these Pfizer and Moderna vaccines are safe, I mean, for the most part, they really are. When you get vaccinated, people have, if they have serious or life-threatening reactions, it's usually within the first 15, 30 minutes, okay? And that's the reason why, if you can think to your children, when they get vaccinated, they have them sit down or they have them lay down, right? Because a lot of people also pass out. And they don't pass out because something's wrong with the virus. They pass out because of their fear of needles. So it's quite common. And we watch people for 15 to 30 minutes. So this is what we're doing with this vaccine, okay? There, as of last week, I want to say Friday or was it Saturday? I think Moderna had only 10 out of, 5 million doses that had already been given out from Moderna. 10 people that had a serious allergic reaction to it. And they immediately got Benadryl, steroids, and they recovered right away. So we've not had anybody to date with Moderna or Pfizer that have had sustained problems with it or that have required them to be hospitalized that I'm aware of, and nobody has died, okay? And I know the media likes to hype up things, particularly say folks who were vaccinated, and then all of a sudden they died 2 or 3 weeks later. Prime example, Hank Aaron. So people said, well, Hank Aaron got that vaccine, Dr. Cole, and then he was dead 4 days later. First of all, he got it several weeks ago, okay? And how old was the man? Okay, the man was in his 80s and he wasn't in great health to begin with. So when you start thinking about who's important, who we need to protect, we learned from the Chinese in Southeast Asia, in Europe, because they have an older population in comparison to the United States, that this disease was not great for people who were 65 and older. And so that's why you heard a lot of the information initially, because all we had was the data from other countries. was that it was a disease that was a problem for people who were older, okay, and not kids. Okay, and then when we got to the United States, we realized people still stuck with that message, not kids, which was not true. Kids do get this. Kids can get real sick with this. The rate at which they do it is much less than adults, but they carry it and they transmit it to adults and other kids just like adults do. And we learned that information over the summer. Okay, so one quick thing, if you think about what I just told you about phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3, usually those phases are 12 months to 18 months each, okay? And then the people who participate in each of those are followed several years out to make sure everything is okay with them, okay? Now, folks say, well, you know, Dr. Cole, they got that vaccine out there because Trump had money in Moderna, and that was a political thing because he was just trying to get elected again. And I'm not going to take it because I know they took shortcuts. And then I say, I can understand that that is a concern, but that's not how this works. So remember I told you that we've known about coronavirus families since the late 60s, all right? So because of that, there has been all kinds of work done on trying to develop vaccines. Prime example, SARS, when it came, we were in the midst of working on vaccines for it. It only lasted about a year or so. It died out. It's never come back. So all the work that all these pharma groups did, they froze, because that's what you do in science. And you know, you do stuff, and you freeze samples and you thaw stuff back out. And so when we recognized that this coronavirus was kind of related, a cousin to this previous one, you know, they already had safety data on different trials. They had already used it in certain populations of people. They already kind of had a really good understanding of what was going on. So they were able to do that. At the same time, and we don't do this, and this is the first time the world has done it, is that we start manufacturing at the same time we start clinical trials. We don't do that. Why don't we do that? Because pharma is trying to make money. They don't want to invest billions of dollars into something and then have to scrap it if it doesn't work. Prime example, last week, Merck scrapped their vaccine, and they had billions of dollars that got put into that. All right. Now they're just, I don't even know what the reasoning behind it is, because things are so transparent. And I know people think, no, they're not. Yes, they are. The reason why these companies are able to give these press releases, and they're instantly picked up, and they're on television, and they're on Facebook, and they're on Instagram, and they're on TikTok. And that's not normally how we do these things either. Usually data is kept, it is reviewed by people, they call it peer review. So other physicians, other clinicians, other vaccinologists, they review it. Everybody decides, you know what, we think this is good data. It's not biased. This seems like it's good. Okay. And then other labs take that and they try it and see if they can get the same kind of results. Okay. That's a long process. Obviously, we're not doing all of that because it's a pandemic and people are dying. What are we trying to do? Stop folks from dying, stop folks from getting hospitalized. Because why? Our hospitals are overrun. There's not enough staff. There's not enough staff for the critical beds that we need, because when people do get severe illness with this, we're finding that when they were dying sooner in the pandemic, March, April, June, now we've learned so much more that even people who get serious disease with this are spending a long time in the hospital. And in order for the lungs primarily to be able to heal to a certain degree, as well as some of the other complications that can happen at this virus. This virus likes to cause the blood to clot and form blood clots. So you may have heard about folks who presented and they had a stroke or they had a heart attack. And it's because the virus, and maybe they didn't have any other symptoms, no respiratory symptoms, so no shortness of breath and no my chest heaviness and no fever. This virus causes a wide spectrum of things. But this blood clot deal is interesting because we're having to put people on blood thinners. Even people who have moderate disease or mild disease at home, we're treating them at home and saying, hey, start taking a baby aspirin. We need you to start taking a baby aspirin to keep the blood kind of thin.
I've got a
Okay.
question, a couple, oh,
Sure.
I've got a couple
Go ahead.
questions, Dr. Cole, regarding children. As you said, they do affect children, but at a lower rate, I believe. You said, if that's the case, I've seen something on the news. Conservative and liberal channels both say that it's safe for children to return to school. What's the caveat, or is that appropriate, protocols, safety protocols are in place? My son's starting his first day of high school tomorrow. I think we made an informed decision. What's your view on, is it safe for kids to return to school, fact or fiction?
Okay, so I think that we need to talk about which kind of school age kids. So we have seen a lot of data now that shows us, so we've compiled data from the summer when kids were going to sports camps, they were going to Christian camps, religious camps, all those things. And we learned that doing things outside or doing things that had a lot of ventilation was a big deal. We also learned that it wasn't just I'm yelling at you and that's how the viral particles are getting to you. It's I can just be sitting here and I'm breathing in and out of my mouth, and I'm not doing anything and I'm still releasing virus. We learned that this summer, okay? We also know though that the big thing is that mask wearing. And if you wear the mask correctly over your nose and your mouth and you keep it on, and you impose these social distancing protocols. There are a lot of schools who also made certain hallways, you go down one direction, and that's the direction you go down. You probably have seen that in grocery stores where they have it, you can only go in one direction, and that it's to eliminate passing by people, okay? Originally, when airplanes were, making their adjustments, which they've kind of laxed on, they would allow the people who not first class, but they allow folks in the back to get in there first. So nobody was passing by anyone, okay? So there have been schools that have done a really good job because they take the cleaning part of it seriously. They have made the class size much smaller. They put up the plexiglass, and kids are, kids are pretty resilient, and they are understanding the importance of keeping the mask on, which is really good. And I think that people really didn't give them the credit that they had. If you explain to a child what's going on, they use a mask. My kid won't pop out of this door unless he has on a mask. He can be going to the mailbox, and I keep telling him, honey, it's just you. But the idea is, I think you can do that. So in younger children, you can dictate pretty much it's lunchtime at your desk. They don't have to go to their lockers, all that. It's when you start getting to high school that it's a little different, because now you're really exchanging classrooms a lot. You have other things going on, whether it's band or it's drama or whatever it is and it's a little more difficult to kind of corral high schools, and they're much larger schools. So that's the concern. So when you see some of these school districts who have pre-K through 6th grade or through 8th grade, and they're back, but not high school, those are some of the concerns. Now, there are high schools who are doing really well with that. And I think a large part of it is that they're testing, and that's important for all of this. The sad thing is, testing is still a problem, and being able to test right away is important, because if you can test and somebody is positive, then you isolate them and then they go home. But then you can contact trace whoever everybody was that they came into contact with. In my particular area, kids have to, there's this app that kids log into every day, and they talk about whether or not they have symptoms, whether or not they had a fever. By the way, a fever is not a good indicator of whether or not you have this, because kids get fevers for all kinds of reasons. And remember, it's cold season and it's flu season, so all of that is still out there. But it does identify whether or not somebody is maybe having some difficulty with this. The issue with school that I am always most concerned of is the teachers and the staff that work in those buildings, because a lot of those folks have pre-existing conditions. They have chronic diseases that they're taking. We know that it's not just diabetes and blood pressure problems, it's also being overweight, it's also being morbidly obese, that people who will have a higher risk of having problems if they get this, and the likelihood that they'll have severe disease, which we're most concerned about. So it's those folks. And I think that because the Biden administration is doing a lot of catch up in terms of being able to have testings and flood money into the public health, whether it is local public health departments and state public health departments, there's wide variation across the United States of how well that is. And public health has been grossly underfunded for the last 25 years. So there's not that infrastructure. They weren't ready. They didn't have this readiness. And then the CDC was taken out of the picture. So if you think about school, I think now that it is probably safer to send them back and the kids are going to be okay. It's the adults that I worry about. And I believe everybody that's in the school system is an essential worker. And the way that the priority was decided about who gets what. So there's a committee within the CDC. They do immunization practices. Okay, so once Moderna and Pfizer presented each their information to the FDA advisory committee, and they said, yes, we're going to go ahead and let you have this emergency use authorization. That data gets sent to the CDC, and then they look at it and they decide, okay, who's going to get this first? How can we make this fair? And I think what we're falling into now is what we always do, is how the disease affects us, Black, brown, and Native folks the most. And how do we get accessible testing and vaccines to them? And, you know, it's always been a problem. And the money is not being sent to the right, I don't think, to the right places. And so I think where we're hung up now is so many large school districts are extremely worried about, and their unions, about teacher safety. And I don't blame them, because I think what they're doing is they're looking at what happened early in the pandemic in New York and how New York lost a lot of teachers and principals and staff. But that was also in the beginning where we didn't know as much. We didn't realize that, you know, it's also a cumulative time. So 15 minutes now is kind of the cumulative time if you're coming in contact with somebody, you know, and if you're in close contact with them, that 15 minutes, you stack it up all day long. So we didn't know that kind of stuff. And, you know, now that we know that kind of stuff, we know to keep distance, we know to do those things. But I think
I've got a question as far as like adults that may have previously had COVID. Like we've had some, we've all got, I think everybody knows somebody that's had it to varying levels of severity or asymptomatic. But for someone that, let's say, had COVID in June, do they still have the antibodies? Are they still protected from getting it again? Are the variants of concern? That's a loaded question, but I didn't mean for it to be too loaded.
Nope, I got it. So this is the deal, and we don't have the immunity piece worked out. So if somebody tells you they know exactly what it is, they are not telling the truth. Certain people can get this and not develop any antibodies. There have been a number of folks that's been a problem with, okay? But there are other parts of your immune system. So we focus a lot on antibodies, but there are also T cells and B cells. And so we think that those cells also have something to do with it. So while we check for antibodies, it doesn't necessarily mean that some of those folks still didn't get a robust immune response. Some folks did get antibody development, but it wasn't at a level that we thought would be protective of them. And then some folks do develop antibodies and T cells and B cells, and they do just fine. What we know is that people who have developed those, it can last anywhere from 2 weeks to 3 months to 6 months. There's no defined period. And because of that, we know that you can catch this again. And why I mentioned to you all the importance of knowing the genetic code to different things for testing is because then you can identify strains. So if somebody got it twice, I have had several patients that have gotten it two, 3 times.
Oh,
So
wow.
they got it early in March. Well, they're essential workers, right? So they were, even though they took precautions and they were wearing things nice, and, over their nose and their mouth, and they're washing their hands with soap and water, and they're, trying to maintain distance, they have to go to work. So they've caught it 2 or 3 different times. But when you looked at the genetic code of it, you realize it wasn't just they were a long haulers. So somebody who got it, and then all of a sudden they kind of got better, and then they weren't infectious anymore. But then all of a sudden they start maybe having fever, and they started having, brain fog, or all these other symptoms that people who are called long haulers, they've had it. You realize that there was 2 different strains, or the third time they got it was a different strain. So we know that happens. This issue with the variants is really complicated because, number one, in our country, we do not do a good job of genomic surveillance. So that means we're not taking the samples that we get from your nose or your mouth, and we're not sending them off to the CDC or wherever else so they can look at the code and say, okay, we know this strain is here and this is a problem. They do that in the UK. They do a great job of it. And that's why we know so much about the United Kingdom. So what we're concerned is if you start hearing about certain vaccines and how they do better with certain vaccines, and how certain vaccines, like I think it is AstraZeneca or Novavax or Johnson & Johnson.
J&J is a single shot, right? That's
well, no. Well, it's going to be 2 shots. And the reason why, okay, so things in pandemics change. Our advice changes, guidance changes. You've seen that with the mask deal. You're going to see that with medications we said worked, then all of a sudden we realized it really didn't work. I mean, and people, we're learning in real time. So new data came out yesterday, and it showed that yes, people got protection after 1 shot, but then they got a second shot, which is kind of, I think intuitive, but maybe not. They had an even more protection. Okay. So I think you're going to start seeing it where it's 2 shots. The big deal though is that some of these other vaccines that are coming out, Johnson & Johnson, AstraZeneca, they don't require the storage, the cold storage, the freezing. You don't have to freeze these. They can just stay in a regular refrigerator. I mentioned to you what was in those mRNA vaccines, the Pfizer and the Moderna, because they don't have preservatives in there, they have to stay frozen. And that's the problem that we're having with that, is a lot of areas, rural and urban, do not have those freezer capacities to have those vaccines in there. So you're missing folks that you can't. And then 2, they're pharmacy deserts within areas, just like they're grocery deserts that we find when they're in predominantly brown and Black and Native areas. And so we're waiting for these other vaccines, but that's how we're missing it. Not to mention, there are folks who are well connected and well resourced. They tend to be white so far, that you start to see these reports, who are going into communities of color and they are getting vaccinated. Or they are flying, to Florida, or they were flying to Hawaii. I'm sure you heard about the couple that went up to Canada, and they were able to get the vaccine because they were able to use it, to get to where it was being distributed. So it's kind of hard, I think, if you're elderly and you don't drive, and they say, oh, but we're gonna have a mass vaccination place at whatever stadium. Well, that's not helpful if it's not in your community, right? So this idea of variants is going to be complicated for a number of different things, and you're going to continue to hear information change about which vaccines are better. But all in all, these are some really safe vaccines that are coming out. And the fact that we're going to have them all at different times, I think we're going to be able to reach the different groups of folks who can get it. The reason why we are in such a bad situation is because we were overpromised the supply from the last administration. and we were told 40 million people were going to be vaccinated by December 31st of 2020. And
Not
that
happening.
did not
Not
happen.
happening. Yeah.
Not going to happen. And you had pharmaceutical companies saying, wait now, we didn't tell you that. We told you we could supply you this amount. And then in June, we can give you another 100 million vaccines. So they set up this expectation that the vaccine was going to be available for absolutely everybody. And you can go ahead and you can hurry up and get vaccinated. And then people who are in career science and career scientists who have no political agenda have been saying, okay, let's just dial this back and let you know we're not going to have enough to do everybody. That's the reason why we need to do high risk folks, healthcare people who are on the front lines who are going to see this all the time, EMS, police officers, firefighters. We needed to be able to give it people who work in the mortuaries. And we needed to be able to do teachers. And so there's been argument back and forth about who is the most important and who to give it to. I think you all have seen the confusion over the fact that when they say, okay, that's priority group 1A or 1B, there's like no time period on it. It's like, okay, so when does that start?
Yeah.
When does it end?
Yeah.
Okay, there's no time to that. And part of that is because we don't know, we're still trying to figure out the total supply of the amount of vaccine we have. The other thing is, there's this within the last day, talking greatly, I think within the Washington Post and Wall Street Journal and some of the local papers about how the vaccination rates for Black folks is really down. Well, I mentioned some reasons why that would be, okay? So lack of access, not having it in the area you are. And then the way that a lot of these waiting lists are is you gotta have Wi-Fi to be able to have a smartphone or a laptop or a desktop to be able to constantly get on and try to get your name on that list.
So that was my next question is how do we tell people that are interested, how do they get it? So like in my job, for example, we've been telling people to go to their county's, Department of Health and to put their, to do the survey or to put their name on the registration list and then, can come up that way. But then I've also been hearing people say, if you go on like different Walgreens websites. And so it started to kind of come out more and more commercially. So if someone is interested, what's like the one thing that they could do to try to better their chances? If there is one thing.
Pray.
Right.
Is it correct to start with your county and to place yourself on the list?
I would say this. I would say that if you have a primary care provider, which a bunch of healthy folks will say, well, I don't need one, so I don't have it. Or you don't have access to one and you're using urgent care or the ER as your primary care. So those folks aside, start with your primary care provider. But look at your local public health office, okay? And see, everybody is doing it differently. And that's the problem, that the federal government should have directed this from the beginning. From testing to talking about vaccines and how money and supplies were going to be distributed to the states, because the federal government allowed the states to come up with their own stuff. It's really disjointed. Mm-hmm. And what should have happened was this: FEMA should have been used to dispense the personal protective wear, get masks, gowns, all that kind of stuff to people, to areas, to giving to states and dispensing that. The Defense Production Act should have been used. So say, Ford, we need you to stop making cars and we need you to start making ventilators, okay? Mm-hmm. Kraft, we need you to start making gloves and foot and shoe covers. I mean, those are things, because a lot of things like that, gloves and personal protective gowns, stuff like that, are not made in the United States. They're made where? China. Okay, mm-hmm. So if you have a whole world that's looking for all these same things, there's a shortage, and there is still a shortage in all of that stuff. So now you have a federal government under a new president who's trying to utilize this. So to get back to what do you do? Try your primary care. Also, look for your local health department. Find out, a lot of people aren't answering phones. So it's really dependent again on using the computer to be able to get through them. And then you're starting to see different states allowing certain large pharmacy chains carry them. Walgreens, Walmart, CVS, Hy-Vee, Rite Aid. And the reason is because, like I told you, Pfizer and Moderna require these frozen storage places. So if you don't have these deep cold freezers like academic centers or real large hospitals, then you're reliant on these big chain pharmacies. So going to their website, again, that means you got to have Wi-Fi and you got to be able to get to a computer or your smartphone. Each of those companies is now telling you when this is available. And I wish that I could say, you know what, it's going to be at this place all the time and you can start going here. But I can't, because every state is doing this differently. I mean, you have Florida that's, that has decided that besides just their healthcare workers, all they were doing were folks 65 and older. They weren't making sure it was other essential workers that were getting it. I mean, so when you have states coming up with their own thing, it's a problem. And we all have a supply problem. I think that the way that this could have worked and what I would have loved is if they had given it to those large pharmacies up front, that they would give it to small community pharmacies that are, that are in rural places, in inner cities, places like that. They wanted it. If they had the capacity to have the freezers for it, give it to them. I also feel like we should be using home health. So if there are people who have home health, that they should be trained, and so they can give vaccine at home. That if churches are comfortable, that folks who have medical training, that vaccines should be given to churches with and temples and mosques, so folks can come in to places they know, to people they see, who they trust, to get vaccine and to get information. I also think that there should be mobile vans, mobile units, where they drive to places where there isn't access and they give vaccinations out, because it's super easy. When I went and got mine, I literally did not get out of my car. I drove up, they handed me the paper, I signed the release, I drove around to the little bank shot, the pneumatic tubes. I put in my ID, I put in the fact that I signed off of it. They confirmed it. The nurse came right on out. I rolled the window, I pulled my arm out. She was like, "Oh, Dr. Cole," blah, blah, blah. Gave it to me. That was it. I waited, then I drove back out on the round, sat up there. There was a nurse who was standing out there. She watched all these different cars. She had a timer and she watched it for 15 minutes. Everybody was safe. She gave the thumbs up. I was out of there.
So have you done, I'm sorry.
It was less.
Have you done both already?
No, I've done one.
The one,
so
okay.
Less than 30 minutes, okay? And that is the reason why I think we can do it in mobile vans. We could also go into, I think, housing complex and apartment complexes, whether it's with groups that are religious related or community oriented based. So fraternal organizations, sororities, other fraternal groups that could be a part of it. I really feel like because it's not difficult to train people how to use these, okay? It just isn't. And especially when we start getting to these vaccines, these 2 and 3 other vaccines that aren't going to require freezers, you're going to be able to they'll be able to sit out. We need to be able to take vaccine to people rather than making people come to vaccine. And that's how we're able to reach more folks.
We've got a question that came in from someone that wants to know about that second shot. That's why I was curious if you had already gotten your second shot. So the question is that there's reports that there can be symptoms when you receive that second shot. For some people it's minor, for some people, it could be a greater reaction. That's the word I was looking for. What are your thoughts on that?
Okay, so there's kind of several scenarios that are happening. So when I got mine, what we're finding is in older people, they are not having a problem. They get it and they're like, you know what, my arm is sore, but I took some Tylenol and it was okay. And I'm like, really? Because I got mine and I was fine. But by midnight, boy, my arm hurt. My joints were hurting. I was like, man, this sucks. But then I remembered risk benefit. Risk benefit is hey, I can tolerate some discomfort for 24 hours, 48 hours, because I don't want to get this junk. And that's exactly what happened. It responded to Tylenol. I never got a fever. And the joint aches went away in a day and a half.
Okay.
But older folks are doing really well. I mean, really well. And it's kind of astonishing. And the reason why I guess on one hand is, the older you get, the weaker your immune system becomes. And usually vaccines, we require stronger doses for them. So an example is like the shingles vaccine. So there's some people who got the shingles vaccine maybe 5, 6, 7 years ago, but now we've updated it. It's much stronger. So we're having those folks come back in. Same thing with the vaccine for pneumonia, Pneumovax, that we use a stronger dose in older folks. And it's because their immune system is weaker. So what we think is, that it's probably because they have the weaker immune system to begin with, but that they're still going to get the protection, but they're not getting these horrible kind of symptoms from it, or they're not having some discomfort like we are. Even in the second shot, this is what I am noticing and what a lot of folks are noticing, and it's starting to get put into the scientific literature, is that if you've had COVID, okay, and you've recovered, and then you get the vaccination, people have symptoms on that very first shot. They feel like they are experiencing the whole disease all over again. They're doing the sweats, they're short of breath, they're uncomfortable, and they're all high, all of those things. And we know it's because their immune system recognizes the virus right away. And so it jumps on it. And those symptoms you are experiencing is what your immune system is out here doing, fighting. So it's doing what it's supposed to do. Now, for folks who have had it and then they go on to get their second shot, they have some symptoms similar again, but then they go away. All of this stuff is really short-lived. And there's so many people who were really shocked that when they got their second vaccination, they weren't any more uncomfortable than they were the first time. And honestly, I've never had a problem with vaccines. This was the first where, I had the response that I did, and it was very short-lived. But I was thinking, okay. And honestly, you have to think of the risk and benefit. And I know people are thinking, well, my mom is 72. I don't know. I don't think I should get. No, yes, you do. You want to really talk to older folks, because the trade-off is the disease is so much worse. And we have no way of being able to say, you know what, your mom is not going to get hospitalized, but your uncle is going to get hospitalized. There's no way to know that. And that's part of the problem with this, is we're not able to say definitively, if you get it, you're going to recover and have no symptoms, and you're not going to have any problems. None of that. The other thing is, there are 40% of the United States that gets this, and they never have a symptom. They're asymptomatic, which means they continue to give it to other people. Mm-hmm. So I think the second shot kind of got a lot of bad press, because there are people who were experiencing things all along with different ones, but all of it is very, very short-lived.
I've got a question similar to that. What would you say to the skeptic? You were kind of talking about, let's say older people, but let's say someone who's younger, however we characterize younger, under 60, in good health, no pre-existing conditions. There's a lot of us that Black folk, you mentioned that our numbers are, for a host of reasons, we're not getting vaccinated as much. But for those of us who want to wait around to see what other people do, see if they grow a third arm, this, that, or the other. If I was your patient and say, I don't know, Dr. Cole, I'm gonna wait, I'm doing fine, what would you say to convince me that it'd be in my best interest to take the vaccine when I'm able to?
Okay. So this summer, everybody may have remembered how all these athletic conferences they were vacillating about whether or not they should have fall sports, volleyball, football was the big one because that's the money
Money
generator,
maker.
right?
Mm-hmm.
What it was coming down to was the fact that there were student athletes, not just football, student athletes in the Big Ten who had gotten COVID, did not have a single symptom. But something said, let's scan their heart. Let's do a cardiac MRI and see. And found that a bunch of these kids had myocarditis. They had inflammation of the heart. They never had a symptom. Why is that important? Because, and you may remember hearing about this, the young man that played basketball in Florida. Yes. And the reason why he passed out on the floor and he went into cardiac arrest is because he had COVID some time ago and ended up having myocarditis. And usually a lot of viruses can cause it. This virus, we're starting to see a more of it. And then you can't predict, we're not going to give cardiac MRIs to everybody walking around. The seriousness of it is sometimes, these things resolve on their own in 3 to 6 months. But if there's still residual inflammation there, which there is, if you're dropping dead like that for so many minutes on that floor, you're not going to be able to play again because the risk is you play again, you're going to go in a cardiac arrest. So these are all healthy kids, right? Because they're playing sports. And the ones that are playing basketball and football and baseball are thinking about professional careers. Okay. So these people were, through no fault of their own, ended up getting it because what did people say in the beginning? Oh, it's just like the flu. It's not a big deal. Oh, well, I was positive, but I didn't have any symptoms. Okay. So that's one case. So you can have this, not have a single symptom, but there can still be inflammation going on inside of you. I have plenty of patients had that, ended up having kidney problems months later, not knowing why, related to this. Ended up having heart failure, perfectly healthy 26-year-old, a bunch in their 40s ended up having heart failure. And it came on and we couldn't figure out, and then we realized that this was an offshoot of what had happened and that there was a lot of inflammation going on internally that just did not show itself in symptoms. Okay. The other thing is, if you saw, what's that comedian's name? What's the comedian who had COVID, but we didn't know he had COVID at the time, and he was on the stage and he passed.
Hughley.
Yes, that was his symptom. He passed out. And we know that people pass out with this, and that's their only presenting symptom. We test them, and we know that's one of the reasons, because this virus has symptoms that go from nothing to stuff that's super severe. It's just that wide. Okay, I mean, it primarily is a respiratory virus and respiratory illness, but it affects absolutely every single organ system. Okay, he didn't know, and so it was like, so am I going to have problems later in life? Do you know that? I don't know. You don't know that. And the third thing is, this summer, probably July, the Department of Defense came out and made a statement that said people who were going into the armed services, okay, if they test positive for COVID-19, they were not allowing them to go on. So if you tell me, if the Department of Defense is saying we're not going to take people who have had COVID, that lets you know, okay, it's serious, because we don't know the long-term effects, right? And, we're relying on people to be able to protect us and protect our interests. And also, we don't want it because they are always in congregate settings with one another. They're bunked up. And I told you how easily this spreads. It spreads. But that was an indication to me, and it was quiet. Like, it came out and nobody really said a whole lot about it. But I started telling people, you think your child is going to go off to the Navy? You need to tell him he needs to start washing his hands and wearing that mask and acting like it's not just about other people out here. Because even if he gets it and he's asymptomatic, there's probably going to be a problem where they're not going to be able to do that. They're not going to be able to go through that. The other thing is, then this is the fourth thing, that insurance companies are going to look at this as a pre-existing condition. So when you get ready to turn around and get insurance policies and stuff, if you had this in your file, they are going to use it. I already know it because I've had patients who've had problems with it already. And they're like, Dr. Cole, I don't understand. And I said, it's because they don't want to insure based off of long-term effects. And it's not like we're scanning everybody's body, because honestly, there's not a lot of room in a lot of these hospitals for people, because we're keeping them in the hospital longer who've gotten super sick. So we're managing a lot of moderately sick people at home, on oxygen. We're checking their stats. We're doing a whole bunch of stuff. We're doing a lot of virtual visits. And it's because it's not enough room. So there are probably, under ordinary circumstances, many more folks should be in the hospital that aren't. But those are the 4 reasons that I give people when they tell me it's not about me. I'm not going to get it because, I drink elderberry syrup and I take vitamin C and I take turmeric and all of that stuff. And then I tell them those 4 different things. And then people go, oh, really? And I say, yeah, for real.
I've got another one.
And then I tell them, okay, we have now given out, 30 million shots now almost, and nobody's died. Absolutely nobody. And those things are reported every single day. Just like we know, we can watch on CNN and it can tell us how many people have died already in the day. That is the kind of information that's getting sent to Johns Hopkins and then filtered to the CDC from states. We are knowing this kind of thing.
So those are compelling reasons. Here's another one. What about people that I've heard, I have a relative that's allergic to penicillin, or you have people that I've heard, I have too many pre-existing conditions I'm concerned about, or, I'm pregnant. That's 3 different questions, but, allergies, pre-existing conditions, pregnancy, what would you advise them on whether they should get vaccinated or not?
Okay, so the American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology has said pregnant women are high risk in and of itself, whether or not they have any chronic health problems or not. Being pregnant is high risk. You should get vaccinated. And we are telling folks, get vaccinated. Obstetrics is saying you need to be vaccinated. Even high risk pregnancies that have all these problems, you have the Society of Maternal Fetal Medicine that does a lot of the high risk stuff. And they also talked about lactation. So people who are breastfeeding, they say there's no reason why you cannot get vaccinated. You need to get vaccinated. Okay. So pregnant folks and people who are breastfeeding, no reason why they can't get this. The reason why I told you that Pfizer and Moderna's vaccines were 4 sugars, salt water, a fat layer that protects the mRNA, and there are no preservatives, is to let you know there's nothing in there that's going to cause a problem with, I have a penicillin allergy, I have a sulfa allergy, I have an egg allergy, any of those reasons. No. And the only way you would have an allergy to this is if you had this shot maybe the first time and developed some sort of problem from it. But that's so few and far between. It's like 1 in 100,000 people in general. All vaccines in the United States have this, this severe adverse effect to it. So there's no medication reason that should stop you from getting it. Having too many pre-existing conditions. Okay, so if we're saying people who are in long-term care and in nursing homes, some of the sickest folks, chronically sick, chronic problems, and we're saying we need to hurry up and vaccinate them to protect them. If you're living at home with a whole bunch of problems, there's no reason, with these 2 vaccines that you should not get it.
Okay.
If you don't, so I just tell people, if you don't want to get it, just say you don't want to get it. There's no reason. You can't come up with a reason, because I'm gonna tell you there's not a reason.
Okay. I want to switch gears for a second.
Sure.
What if, and we can absolutely come back, but since we're bumping up against somewhat our time, I just want to know, what's your advice if someone does get COVID? So if you're starting to not feel well and get COVID, what are you advising your patients to do? If the worst case scenario happens and you get it and you're experiencing symptoms, how are you advising your patients to care for themselves at home?
Okay, so the things that you worry about at home is if you have trouble waking up or arousing, you're confused. That's a red flag, okay? Whether you come confused, don't know what's going on, start talking crazy, all that. It's the second red flag. Third, start getting a little blue around in here, blue on your fingertips. It means you're not getting enough oxygen. That's a red sign. If you start having chest pain so severe that you can't relax, it's not relenting, that's the fourth one. Those are the ones that you got. Well, and I take that back. Fifth, if you have a persistent fever, and I'm talking in adults, we're talking like 103, 104, that's high for adults, not kids necessarily, but for adults, pretty high, and it's not responding, you need to get in there and be seen.
Okay.
Now, you know how isolating this illness is. So many people are in multi-generation homes, and you have to be of means to be able to have COVID, to be able to isolate in your room and have a bathroom to yourself. A lot of folks aren't getting it. And that's the reason why you have whole households that end up getting it, okay? Because it's that difficult. And so what you end up doing is you tell people that you're gonna have to wear a mask inside your house. You're gonna have to use a lot of Lysol. You're gonna have to do a whole bunch of cleaning. That person's, their own utensils, their cup, their plate, their knife and everything, that's what's used. You use gloves, you use eye protection around them. You wear the mask around them and you don't spend time around them. You take their stuff, you give it back. And that's like the best thing that you can do. If you notice that you're starting to get really short of breath and having problems, then you need to make a call. And this is the other thing that kind of isolates you too, is it's not like, okay, I'm just gonna go to the ER, because you're gonna get stopped probably in the parking lot, like, wait, come on over in here in this tent. You can't just come up in here, right? And if you call your primary care provider, they're gonna be like, nope, don't come to the office. Don't come to the office. You can come to the parking lot. We're gonna come out there and we'll talk to you in the parking lot. Or they say, nope, we're not even seeing people in the office, but you can get a telehealth appointment. So we can see you virtually, but no. So those are kind of deterrents, because if you get hospitalized, if you call the ambulance for somebody, they're not going to let you go. They're only going to take that person if you have COVID or COVID-like symptoms. And or if they do allow you to trail them and you get there, they're not going to allow you when you get in there to come in there with them. And that's the other thing. So you have people who have this horrible illness that's highly infectious, and that they don't have family and support with them right there. It's not like your pastor can come in or your rabbi can come in and pray with you. Not happening. You're going to have people who are gowned up and gloved up and probably with a picture of themselves taped to that, so you know what they look like without all the headgear and everything on there. And that's who you're going to be seeing. And if you got to rely on nursing staff to have iPads or whatever it is they're doing to allow people to Google Duo or FaceTime or WhatsApp, whatever they're doing to allow people to see it. That's horrible. So you have a lot of people suffering by themselves. They're suffering by themselves at home, or they're suffering by themselves in that hospital. Mm-hmm. And there's absolutely nothing we can do to even change that.
I've got a question about those people. You've convinced me. Actually, I was convinced beforehand, but I could hear some people saying, "Oh, I'm gonna sign up now." Once we do get our second shot of the, we might have to have you back at a later time once some of these other vaccines that come out. But regarding the two vaccines that are out now, once we get those, do we still need to wear masks? When are we kind of safe to do our normal thing? What should we expect, after we get our second shot?
Okay, so the way vaccines work, right, is that it takes about a week to 2 weeks. So we always say 2 weeks before your immune system is going to be able to be like, yes, I can protect you. All right? But you're going to still need to wear a mask. We're going to be wearing masks all this year. I know that sounds terrible. I know people are sad about it, but hey, be inconvenienced. Because even if you get vaccinated, we have these variants that are out here, and we're already starting to work on booster shots for people who've gotten it. So you're going to end up probably getting a booster shot. And then we're also making adjustments in some of these vaccines for people who end up getting vaccinated much later to taking. And we do this every single year with influenza. There are many different strains that are in the influenza shot that we get every year. And we look at the problematic circulating strains the year that's circulating before, and we make sure that they're in there and we try to tag it. So this is not going to be any kind of different. It'll be more similar. But because it's in real time, people are a little bit uptight about that. Now, if your whole household is vaccinated, the thing about it is kids are going to end up, so say mom and dad or grandma and auntie are vaccinated and their kids at home, you're going to end up getting herd immunity in the household. Why? Because they're going to be in close contact. So, what you breathe in and out, when you yell or you talk or whatever, the same kind of concept of, being able to pass on, you'll be able to pass on antibodies like that. Okay. So kids will eventually get it if they're in a household full of folks, or maybe even one person. There's really no way to tell, but usually that's kind of how you get that. The variants deal, and because you don't know who's asymptomatic, because if you're asymptomatic, you're not getting tested. And so you're going to have to still wear this mask deal, but it might get better in terms of, there might be indoor dining now, or there might be able to have socially distanced baseball or whatever it is. The more people become vaccinated, we need to get to a point where 70% of the 330 million Americans get vaccinated to have herd immunity that would protect almost everybody, and the virus would stop spreading. We've vaccinated, as of today, 2% of the United States population. We've got a long way to go. And then, of course, there are folks who are hesitant because, they think the vaccine is going to have a chip in it, and they're going to have some sort of chip that the 5G towers are going to say. And, and people chuckle, but it's true. Like I have to talk to people every single day about things that they see on TV and on, YouTube. I can't stand YouTube now because of all the slick videos by sketchy they kind of look scientific and and then they tell you all these crazy things. When you see that vaccine, you see it's clear. There's no chip in there. And I'm always tickled when people say, yeah, because Dr. Cole, they're going to put a chip right here. How are you going to get a chip right there? We put vaccines right here. I didn't think about that part. Yeah, right. So, those sorts of things, and people believe them. I have a lot of older patients who believe white people are getting a better vaccine than what Black folks are. And you have to say, what? And then they say, I believe that. And then you say, no. Matter of fact, you're not even getting a choice. You're not getting a choice. That's lets you know how serious a pandemic is. And they don't care who you are. You're going to get the vaccine we're going to give you because that's what we got. So it's not like I said, you know what? I don't want Pfizer. I want Moderna. No, I got what they gave me. And that's exactly how it's working for everybody.
I like that you mentioned some of the misinformation that's out there. What's your source of information? I'm sure you read in scientific journals and literature like JAMA or something like that. But for us regular folk, I've got my sources, and I try to look at multiple sources, and I like to think common sense, and I like listening to the scientists talk freely, which is nice with the new administration. But if you care to say, what's a good source of information, be it print or radio, television, if you can kind of answer, where can we find good, new, and current kind of information?
Okay. You need to know what your local public health department is doing, because they have a website, they have a dashboard, and it will tell you how many people, the age of the person who had, who died in your county. Some of them even tell you which hospitals, how many the hospital beds that are used. It will tell you information about, it will tell you things about where you can go to get vaccinated, where you can go to get tested. It will give you, so always kind of keep your eye on what your local health department is doing, okay? Especially now, because this administration is really going to be supportive of local public health and state public health departments, okay? Then you got to figure out what news source you're going to use. I don't advocate that anybody rely on Facebook or Instagram or TikTok for information. I do not. So you need to pick something like your local newspaper, your local news also, because it'll tell you more about what's happening in your community. How many Black folks are not getting vaccinated, or they'll tell you about local school closing. They'll tell you about restaurant openings. It will give you an idea of the positivity rate that's going on in your community, because we're looking at that. And that gives us a good indication of if people are getting tested enough or if their disease burden is really heavy. So you can look at papers like the Washington Post, which seems to really, in my mind, keep its eye on what's really going on. And if I would follow one institution, even though I have 3 degrees from the University of Illinois, I follow Johns Hopkins, because Johns Hopkins actually is the one that's providing all of these news channels, all of this cable TV, all of satellite radio. They're the ones who are, and they're giving the numbers to the World Health Organization. So you can always go to, if you have Wi-Fi, if you have access to a computer or a smartphone, Johns Hopkins. And then a lot of these academic centers, U of I, University of Minnesota, UCLA, pick one, pick one that you have a favorite team in. If you go online, there's no doubt that they're going to have a whole section devoted to COVID and clicks for different things, concerns that you have, what's happening in that area, what you should be concerned about, what you're worried about. So that is something too. So, and everybody can pick a university and they can get online and they can see what's going on with that. And then if you're really in doubt, I mean, and you're concerned, I would go to the CDC now. I know the CDC took a whole bunch of hits under Trump, but the director of the CDC now, Rochelle Walensky, is like, I think I interviewed with her for my infectious disease fellowship, because she comes from Harvard. She is all about numbers, and she's all about equity and being transparent. Dr. Fauci is like that too, and I think a number of the physicians that are on the task force, as well as the Surgeon General, Vivek, all of these people come from big time science backgrounds, career scientists, no political agenda. So if you said, I follow this person on LinkedIn, or I follow, people like that who are subject matter experts is who I would. So who do I look to? I pay attention to what Rochelle says, and I pay attention to what Tony says. And then of course I keep up with all of the sources that I just told you, and as well as my own college, Infectious Disease Society of America, what their thing is. So you can also go to, the American College of Physicians for Internal Medicine, College of Cardiology, all of these different websites, if you have access to it, also have information about COVID related to the heart, folks who, for the kidneys, that society, all of these places. So it's information everywhere. And I think these colleges and these universities, the reputable newspapers with no political agenda, the CDC, and what your local news and your local health department is saying is what you need to go with.
Okay, good. We got one more question that came into the chat. I know we're bumping up against the end of the time, so we need a couple more minutes of your time, Dr. Cole. But the question says, to be clear, you can still get the virus after having the vaccine. So is it just that the symptoms could be less severe? Because I know you mentioned the booster. So, if you get the vaccine, you can still get the virus. That's possible, but will it just be less severe?
Okay. So I posted last week, while I said don't look at Facebook, right? I use my Facebook.
I'm going to say, because you're my source.
I know.
You're my person, so I'm coming to you.
Talk about this, right? So I posted last week on purpose the Democratic lawmaker, congressional, who had received his 2 doses. And then he went on to test positive for COVID. And people say, well, how's that happen? I thought that's the whole reason why we're getting vaccines. And if you remember what I told you in the very beginning of this talk, the 2 most important reasons we vaccinate folks is that we're preventing them from dying, preventing them to get serious illness. So that means you may get it and have 0 symptoms. Do I know if you're going to be able to give it to somebody in your household that didn't get vaccinated, that hasn't had COVID? I don't know that yet. Today, AstraZeneca said they are the first vaccine that specifically looked at whether or not we give you a shot and does that decrease the transmission. And their data that came out today, even though it's not reviewed by scientists yet, but their press release was, yes, it does. So they are the very first COVID vaccine that says you get it. Not only we're preventing you from dying, and you're not gonna get severe disease, but you're also not gonna give it to somebody else. Does that mean Pfizer's and Moderna's and Novavax and Johnson & Johnson aren't going to be able to do that? No. What it means is we don't have that data yet. And once we have that data, because we're still following everybody from all those different phases, we'll be able to report on that. And I think probably in the next 3 or 4 weeks, you'll start hearing about, what transmission rates of folks who've been vaccinated with Pfizer and 2 doses with Pfizer and Moderna. So, it's you can, just like you get the flu shot and people are like, yeah, but I got the flu. Like, I mean, I got like influenza A for real. Okay, nothing is 100%. And even though Pfizer and Moderna are 94, 95% effective, right? That is something that's all that is God, because I would have never thought we would have had vaccines that effective. The only other vaccine I know that's close to that is the measles vaccine. It's like 97% effective, but nothing that effective. But it's still not 100. So you can still get it. And like I told you, there's no way to be able to say you're going to get symptoms and your symptoms are going to be really bad and you're going to be in the hospital, or you're going to get it, but you're never going to have any symptoms. Same deal with the vaccination. But what you can be confident in is that you're not going to die and you're not going to get serious symptoms. That's what those percentage numbers tell you. And even if you have Johnson & Johnson that's 78% effective, or you have AstraZeneca that's 63% effective, those are still high numbers. That's still a good vaccine. You still, if that's what you're offered, you still take it because it is still really good.
Okay. Well, thank you, Dr. Cole. We definitely appreciate you taking out time from your busy schedule. I'm sure you were with patients all day. So I thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time. I think we got a few questions. I think we answered all the ones that are in the chat. Yes, we did. Okay. Anything you'd like to say?
I just want to, my wife's going to pray as we exit out, but I just want to thank you for you doing the circuit. Seems like you need to be on the task force as well. But when hell broke loose on the earth in March, to the point where I took a couple months off. My wife probably told you I'm a pilot, so I'm like, I don't want to go nowhere, and so I took a couple months off, and you were often our source of information because you kind of post prolifically even though you're talking about the social media.
I know, right? I said, do not. And then I'm like, but I posted about that.
And so I appreciate that. And we got to catch a couple of one of your other interviews, even on your birthday last week, right? With the U of I Carl Hospital.
So I got to the College of Medicine.
Yeah. Yep. So I got to catch that. So I'm grateful that you're doing this work and trying to get us to not be so concerned. And it's such an emotional issue. Everybody knows something tragic and it was welling up in me as you're talking, just thinking about different issues and why we don't want to take it. So I just we appreciate what you're doing.
Yeah.
Just pray for your continued strength and for other healthcare workers for y'all doing God's work. So so I won't delay.
Yeah.
And
Okay. We'll pray out. Thank you, everybody who took the time to join us. We'll talk with Dr. Cole afterwards and see if we can make this available so we can stream it on other platforms. So if everybody could just join us for a quick moment of prayer. Lord, we thank you for this time that you've ordained for us to be here, Lord, to get this information that was shared from Dr. Cole. God, we ask you keep a hedge of protection around her and other healthcare workers, God, and other essential workers, God, and just all of us, God, as you mentioned that healthcare workers are doing your work, God. Lord, we thank you for the people that were assembled here on the call and that will hear this message through other means, God. Lord, we ask that you give us the wisdom that we need, give us the peace of mind that we need to make the decision that we need to be informed and to protect ourselves and our family, God. Lord, we ask you bless us and keep us as only you can. In Jesus' name I pray, amen.
amen. Thank you so much, Dr. Cole.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you, everybody.
My pleasure.
Have a good night.
Thank you.